Today I've got Laura Embrey with me. I came across Laura's wonderful form drawings. I think it was on Pinterest, and that took me to Laura's website. And what happened when I saw Laura's drawings on her website and read about all the different things that you could do with these drawings, I thought I simply have to purchase some of these books. So I went ahead, contacted Laura, and bought all of her books. And then as I started working with these books, I decided that maybe an interview with you, Laura, would be a good idea, because that way I could share with the rest of the world what wonderful work you're doing. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with me. I hope that you would maybe start off by telling us about your background.
So way back in the day, when I was first beginning to be a Waldorf teacher, I was taking my training at Rudolf Steiner College with Dr. Ernst Schubert, and he was so inspiring. You know, I had finished teaching first grade with very good mentoring, but and that the mentor was showing me how to do the form drawings, and I was doing that with the students in their first grade year, and I just saw how powerful they were, and was, very excited about taking this course over the summer. So I really got into it, and I suppose he could tell, but because he was kind of excited about how enthusiastic I was. I was quietly enthusiastic. Anyway, at the end of that course, he asked if there would be anybody willing to put the course itself into American English. Because he's German and his English was fine, but he didn't feel like he wanted to write a book, for Americans. So something pulled my hand up in the air, and I ended up using the rest of the summer to do that with, his cooperation. And, so he helped me edit it and, put it all together. So that was the very first form drawing book. That was my introduction to form drawing, really, was that course.
And for people who are maybe not familiar with, Steiner and the whole Waldorf environment, what would you say that form drawing that's offered to children is? Why is it part of the Waldorf curriculum?
It addresses really the form drawing. Addresses the senses, the development of the senses, the 5 that we usually acknowledge, but then other senses of balance and movement, sense of, like spatial orientation, like where you are in space.
Tell us about your journey towards creating the forms that we then see in your books.
Right. So when I was doing the forms with the children, I really didn't have much idea of what I know now. I didn't have that. I had kind of these, intuitions that this was really healthy for the children. So I did a lot of that with them. And then when I would teach classes at Rudolf Steiner College, because after that book was published, then they said, well, would you come and teach the teachers? And so I did. And that was a blast. I love teaching adults too. So that was really fun. But every time, almost every class, someone would raise their hand and say, what are these forms really for? And, all I could tell them was, well, they develop the senses, and they, develop the thinking, and, those kind of general answers. But like those people, I had a feeling that there was more to it, that each form had its own thing to say. And in fact, some people would ask me, what is the message of this form? Isn't this saying something? And so I think yes, the answer is yes, but I didn't know what to say at that point. And I think that all of us have, kind of a feeling for that. If we take those forms in and think about them, it's like, oh yeah, there's meaning here, and there's activity, like spiritual activity here. Mm-hmm. So Anyway, one summer, it was, I think, in 2014, I was sitting at this very desk and preparing the forms to teach the class. Mm-hmm. And I was drawing a form, and there was a message for me. It was like, well, and it was literally like this. And it's not like I hear voices, okay, but there was a message, and the message was, well, actually, you really should be drawing this with your left hand and going, counterclockwise and doing this in blue. I think I was drawing it in red or orange or something. And so I was like, what? I had been living with this question for years and years and years about, like, what do these forms really do? And it was like, finally, yeah, wow, here's an answer. I started to ask questions, and, well, why would I do this with the left hand and in the counterclockwise direction? And why would it be this color? And what is this really for? So I listened and continued to just ask questions and continued to receive information about that. Then I think it was that very class, it was that summer, and I was teaching a class of teachers, and they started asking the same questions. And this time I thought, okay, I actually have an answer for this now. And they were like, give me more. So they were so excited. Yeah. And so they were asking me, well, can you find a form for this and for that and for this? It's like, well, I'll look, In the next few days of the course, they're saying, these are really powerful. I feel so much better, or whatever, for the, and not all of them, because they work, at a different paces and in different ways with different people.
How long does it take for something to work? Are we talking minutes or hours or days or weeks or months or years? Or maybe are we just actually sowing a karmic seed for, the next incarnation, if you believe in that sort of thing? Is that what's your answer to that?
My answer to that is that that's all correct. It's all correct. Right. Because, well, all right, let's see. I gave, on my website is this form. I hope you can see it. This form? Yeah, you can see it. Yeah. Yeah. This is the form that I received when the COVID-19 problem started, really. And someone asked me for this. And so this is what I got. And I put it up on my website then. And I can say that I've never gotten COVID, but that doesn't prove anything. However, the experience I have had with this form is that whenever I get like a little tickle in my throat or a runny nose or anything, I just trace the form in the air. I mean, I've drawn the form many times, right? And I put it on my water. I make a little one like this, and I put it on my water mug. And anyway, but now if I'm feeling that way, I just draw the form, and those symptoms go. They just leave within minutes. This, as it's been explained to me, is really a form for coronavirus. And there are many coronavirus is like a large, panoply of viruses. So, but anyway, so. Yeah.
And then we've seen that with all the different mutations, of course.
Yes. I did receive another form for the variants, and it's a similar form, but it's on a different color background. So it's like this. Oh, it's on a purple background with a gold line.
Yeah. That's lovely. And that was for?
This is for COVID. The one I just put up was for clearing any mutated COVID-19, any of the variants.
So if someone has COVID and sees this interview, then they can draw that form, and that will help them get through the illness.
Yes, that is what I understand. I haven't had it, and I haven't had that experience. I did, though, hear from a woman who lives on the East Coast of the United States, who wrote back to me once she had taken this up, and her husband was ill with COVID, and she did the form for him, which this can also be done. And within 3 days, he was good.
when I was going through all these many books and looking at all the different types of forms you can do, what happens if you're not able to draw?
You know, there are people who don't have the use of their arms,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And but they can see, and so one can draw the form for them and put it on the wall.
Yeah.
And they just have to look at it, and they don't even have to consciously, you know, have their eyes following the line. It's because what happens with our eyes is when we look at something, our eyes quickly, you know, automatically just do that shape. And so if you look at the form, if there's not a whole bunch of other stuff around it, your eyes look at the form and they actually do trace it. So just looking at the form can help a person. But also I want to make it clear that the person who the form is for doesn't actually have to do the form. They don't have to look at the form. They don't even have to know that the form is being done. A person, if a loved one, you know, is very ill,
yes,
or ill at all, or just has you know, some soul malady or whatever, and you want to help, your work with that it's like prayer. So when we pray for other people, we know that is a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
The working of a form for someone else is like that. You know, always when you offer up the form to the spiritual world, because that's what you're doing it for the spiritual world, who can then take that form and use it for the good of the person that you've intended. You know, you say, I dedicate this form to the health of whoever it is, and may thy will be done.
I noticed that in some of the books there you've put an age limit. Do you have to be a certain age?
Kind of, you know, but this is the books that when I wrote them mainly for adults. Children certainly may do the forms. And if a child has a cold or an ear infection or something, and there are forms for those in the books, the child may do the form if they wish to, but it can just be the parent. I can't emphasize enough that the parent power. And then the child might want to do the form too, and that's fine. But the forms, almost all the forms that have been given to me are forms that should not be done really before 3rd grade.
Okay, so you're in America. Now, it's just for anyone who's in Europe or Asia or, you know, anywhere else where we're not in the American system, 3rd grade is what age?
About 8 years old.
Right.
Yeah, 8 to 9.
Okay.
So, right. And the forms for a 3rd grader are, you know, something like this kind of a form. They're mandala forms, they tend to be, and they sort of swing in and out, to address that 3rd grade sort of mental state, mental emotional state. This is a 3rd grade form on the front. Now, it's not that if a child is younger than that and you want to do a specific form for that child, it's fine to do that. And then if the child wants to join in, then that's okay. They're movements that we're creating that are harmonious. Yeah. And there is so much inharmonious movement that, you know, when the spiritual world sees harmonious movement, they're pulled towards that. They're like, oh, this is interesting. And then they see, you know, whatever the form is, and then the being that's sort of in charge of that form can come close and help that person. So the form, the actual drawing itself, that doesn't have power. It is the communication between the human being and the spiritual world that has the power.
There's so much in your books about, oh, you got to do it, you know, counterclockwise or clockwise. You got to draw it with your left hand instead of your right hand. And actually, one of the questions that came up for me when I was working was, I was doing one of the forms, and this hasn't happened to me in any of the other kind of form drawing things that I've done. Mind you, I haven't really worked with my with my left hand because I'm right-handed normally. So in this form I had, it said use your right hand, and I used my left hand. And then I realized when I got home at night and I was showing it to my my husband and my son, and I was looking and I was thinking, oh, but hang on, it says RH. So that's my right hand. That means, but because it hadn't said dominant hand, something in my brain had switched that day. And so I realized suddenly, oh my God, I've drawn it with the wrong hand. Oh no, well, what have I done? And I was thinking, I need to ask Laura, but because, in the books, it's like, oh, you got to draw it this way, or you got to draw it that way, or you got to use your dot, and you're writing dominant hand or left hand or right. And in some cases, there's no indication at all whether it's left or right, which direction you should be going. And so you're kind of like, oh, so I thought, well, I'll need to ask you about that, because you could, and my husband said, brought up another interesting point. He said, what if you're ambidextrous? Because he's ambidextrous. And I was like, oh, I'll need to ask Laura about that. So
those are great questions. Yeah. So in the books, it is indicated whether you go counterclockwise or clockwise for a particular line and which hand you use. Yeah. And then sometimes it's not. And that's because, when I was getting the forms, I would, usually I can see like the movement, like the direction of because the forms are not still when they show up. They are in constant movement, right? And so I can tell sort of what the general movement of the line is as I see it. And then sometimes it looks like it's going both directions, right? And so I asked about that, and the answer that I got was that if that happens, then the person is really free to do it in whatever direction they want. Now, having said that, the person is always free to use whatever hand. They can use their nose. I don't, they can do this form, in whatever way really gives them joy. And that is the most important thing. Not that you've done it with your right hand or your left hand. And you have not done yourself any harm by doing that with your left hand instead of your right. So please don't worry about that. It's just if you do something with the left hand, many of the clearing forms are done with the left hand.
Yeah.
And that's for, just like erasing something, right? Getting rid of it, banishing it, if you will. And then the right hand is generally used for healing and strengthening forms, because you're creating. So you clear away stuff first, and then in that cleared away space, then you place the things you want to create. Really what the forms are showing is the movement. The forms for the organs are showing the movement of the working of the organ.
In terms of the size of the forms, how important is the size when we're drawing this? Is it okay to draw it really small, or and should we try and practice drawing it first? Do you think it's a good thing to be able to draw it freehand?
It really depends on what the purpose is. So if I'm a teacher and I am, teaching form drawing, I do want the children to be able to draw it freehand, because they are developing their skills, their eye-hand coordination, their spatial orientation, and then I would ask them to walk the form for their, for their backward and forward, just the spatial orientation around themselves. So now an adult can also do that. An adult can take a stick and draw in the sand, as I said in my books, and this will be effective. They can draw with their finger in the air. But, when you're asking the spiritual world for help, say with your throat, okay, and you try to draw the form, as accurately as you can in, say, graphite pencil, and then you can erase because it's graphite. Use your number 2 pencil. Yeah. And what I have suggested is using printer paper size, 11 11 inches by 8.5 inches. Yeah, so it would be on that size paper. Oh, actually, the one I showed earlier is kind of the size that I would recommend to start with. Is, you know, here's this A4 size paper, and then the form should be something like that. Because then it especially if you're a beginner, it really helps you to establish that movement and get it to be not too dinky, because when something is too small, at least when we start, it can just be too intellectual. And so by making it larger, it sort of encompasses the will and the feeling as well as the thinking.
One of the things that I think is interesting in terms of when we're talking about practicing drawing these forms is that I think I was reading at some point that Stine had said that the image works in us. Once we've drawn an image, we take it into our being, and it works in us. And I've experienced this myself when I've drawn a form, and often it's the, you know, transformational form drawing that I do. It can be difficult to do sometimes, or to get a form looking the way that it needs to look in order to be harmonious. And I've experienced this myself. Then, you know, I've gone, why can't I get this form? It's just really frustrating. I can't get it. I can't get it. I can't get it. And then I go home, and then I go to sleep. And then the next day I go back and I try and draw the form again, and suddenly it's just there, because it's had time to kind of work. And this leads me on to the question about, in your books, you talk about not overworking the forms. And I thought that was very interesting, because then the spiritual world can't get to work in us if we don't let go of the forms. And I thought, I have to ask Laura, what does that mean?
Are you a mom?
Yes.
Okay. So you've had the experience of your young children, you know, coming up to you and saying, mommy, 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 I want blah, 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 mommy, you know, they'll do. And students will do that too. Anyway, it's like putting a message out there, like, you know, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need, and you need to just be quiet.
Okay, I've heard you.
And let mom get the juice for you, or whatever it is. You know?
All right, enough already.
Enough already. I heard you. I heard you.
In some of the forms that you're recommending as well, you're saying, you know, this form should be done this many times in the morning and at night. Some of the other forms, there isn't the same kind of level of indication for how long you should be doing it. So you do it once a day, you do it twice a day, or you do it several times. Where do we not overdo it?
The general indications for working with forms is this. You draw the form, and you don't have to redraw it every time, you know, you work with it. You just draw the form in graphite, and you go over it in color and trace it like 3 times in the morning, and then you go back to that same sheet of paper and trace it again. And you can continue to use the pencil, or you can just use your finger.
So once you've got the color on your paper, then the color also plays you know, some sort of importance. Could you say something about that?
I can. I have been given forms that are the same but in different colors, and they do slightly different things. So the color will always affect the astral body and the soul deeply. And so, you know, you can certainly do a form and not include color, but okay. So form itself is like pure spirit. And so, of course, it's fine to do that. The message is still there, and then, but the color is really almost for the person who's drawing the form, because it is enlivening for the soul, and it is it focuses the soul or the individual, you know, on the area that they're most concerned about.
Yeah.
So there, a form could be in purple for one thing and in, say, yellow for another. If you don't use color, you're not being specific in that way, and the focus may not be the same. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't work. As I said, it is true. You could still just draw the form in the sand.
Yeah.
If you visualize the color, then that can help specify, what you want to have happen.
You're talking in your book as well about drawing the form freehand or using a ruler and a compass. You can use, because and you can see that in your books as well. Some of the circles are, perfectly circle round, like compass round, and others you can clearly see that they are drawn, they're still very, very round, like for most people, in order to be able to draw that round a circle, they'd be thrilled, but you can see that it's not done with a compass. And the same with some of the straight lines. You can see some of the straight lines, they're like really, really straight, and some are drawn freehand. What's the difference there, and what would you have to say about that?
What I want to say is I'm pretty sure all the circles that I have drawn, I first began with a compass, and then I went over it with the color. But I don't always do that. I do it as well as I can, but it doesn't always come out perfectly. So anyway, the difference between, using a compass and ruler and not is in our purpose. What purpose do we have in working with the form? And if we're trying to do something therapeutic with it, then, therapeutic in terms of, like correcting a sore throat or a pneumonia or whatever it is, then doing it freehand is maybe going to take forces that we don't need to be using at that moment. And it's not really using our energies to the best purpose.
It's like trying to bake a cake without using the measuring cup, going, here's about a handful, here's about a cup of flour, except
and we're looking at it, we're saying, is it this about it? Is that,
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
It's using the tool that we have to hand.
Yeah. And so, the compass and the straight edge are great tools for us to draw the forms as closely to perfect as we can. They don't have to be perfect, because the spiritual world will get the message, and then the spiritual world corrects that. And then at night, as you've noticed, you can take that into your sleep, and then things come out better the next day. They may never be perfect, but they'll be better. And that the spiritual world is getting that message. And that's the important thing for working with therapeutic forms, is that because you're communicating with the spiritual world a need that you have, and they are responding. Now, if you were a teacher, you would not have the children use compass and straight edge up to, 5th or 6th grade. Some teachers differ on that, but you want them to develop that eye-hand coordination and to be able to draw a straight line or a zigzag line or a square or whatever with, just using their eye, because the eye can be can be trained to be very accurate and to work with the hand. And so when the children are young, that's the time to do that, to develop that ability. If you have been a Waldorf student, you have an advantage, that's all, because you have some confidence in your drawing ability. But, in the mainstream, people are told, oh, that is not good enough, or you can't draw. And so children grow up thinking, oh, I can't draw. Nobody in the Waldorf schools grows up thinking that, because eventually they learn, But so if you're an adult who has not had any of that kind of training, that is, no worries. You just open the book. So you've got, say, clearing forms, and you can literally just trace the forms. I also say in the form, I give permission to copy the forms on a copier and enlarge them. Mm-hmm. So people can do that. I want people to be able to work with these forms. That's the whole point. And so, but, say for something that's this big, that's big enough, to have an effect. And so they could put a piece of printer paper over this and then just trace it. Another thing you can do is just use, if you have a light table, that's great. But if you don't, you can do it, on a window. My students would do that sometimes because it was just a fun thing to do.
I have an example here of a form that I've drawn, one of the left-hand ones. And, you know, it's on a big sheet of paper. This is the one that's for X amount of hands and arms. So it said in the book, I think, you know, you can draw this in these colors. You don't have to draw it in like I think it was shown in red and green, but it said you can use red and lilac instead. So that's what I've done. But if I wanted to do this in a different color, I could put a piece of paper over this and just trace this again. I wouldn't have to actually draw it again, because, you know, it took me a little while to draw it this big freehand. You know, I didn't like enlarge it from the book. Now that I've drawn it and I'm tracing it, I just think, well, it's okay for me. It's like I'm giving myself permission to just reuse this form that I've drawn.
Absolutely. Yes, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's soul economy, you know?
Yes, exactly. And it's yeah, because it's like you were saying earlier, you're economizing with your energy. Is that a good idea to work with more than one form at a time?
It's a very good question. So it is kind of an individual answer, though. So I don't think I finished that answer, but the general indications are to work with a form, you know, trace it 3 times in the morning and then 3 times in the evening for about 2 weeks to 4 weeks, and then give it a rest. Sometimes things will just clear up within those 2 weeks. If they don't, continue, you know, for another week or 2 or something. And then if they're still, whether they're clear or not at that point, just stop after a month and give yourself and the spiritual world a break and wait, you know, a couple of weeks and then take it up again if you feel that that's what you want to do. Regarding the number of forms that you work with at a time, that's really pretty individual, but it is, you know, if you do a lot of forms, you're asking for a lot of work to be done sort of on you all at once.
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, you can handle that and maybe you can't. I do know of one friend of mine who was just really working with these forms so intensively that she kind of made herself sick. And so I know, right? Because they are powerful.
When you say she was making herself sick, what came up? What can you give an indication to anyone who might pick up your books and start working with it? If you get this, then stop.
Well, it would be different, I'm sure, for various people, but she was working with, like, I don't know, 10 or 12 different forms.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a lot as well.
It was a lot. And she was, you know, tracing them more than 3 times. Yeah. She was doing it like 12 times a piece, you know, morning and evening, sometimes at noon. And what happened was some of the ailments that she was trying to clear actually got worse. So, you know, I said, look, you just need to back off for a while. I mean, she really wanted, you know, she wants to get well, right? Like more is better, but that is not always true. Just be measured and maintain your equanimity about it. And that's hard to do, to maintain equanimity if there's something that you really are so tired of and you want to get rid of it. You know, just notice what your body is doing. Be aware of how your body is responding.
You sometimes indicate the number of lines that we should draw. Say there's 2 or 3 lines in a form. Do you start off by tracing the first line 3 times, then the second line 3 times, and then the third line 3 times? Or do we trace the first line, second line, third line? So we're like going through the entire form, and then we're going back to the start and tracing from the start again.
Okay, so this is also a very good question. At the beginning, I think it is important. This is what I understand. It is important to do, say, if you have a form with 4 different lines in it, that you do the first line first, and then you go right to the second line, trace that once, and then you go to the third line, trace that once, and then the fourth line and trace that once. And you do this for the first few times, so maybe for a couple of days, this is how you trace the form. But then it seems to be fine to go and trace the form, and do, the first line 3 times, and then the second line 3 times, and then the third line 3 times, and the fourth line 3 times. You're cementing the relationship between the all 4 lines when you do them 1, 2, 3, and 4 in those first few days. And then once that's really clear, that's the message, right? And then you can sort of reiterate your message in this other way, but because it is easier to just do one line 3 times and then another line 3 times and so forth. It's much quicker, and it's also a little sleepier, but it's not as awakening. Yeah. But if you've done the sort of awake way, then you have the relationship between the lines are established.
I'm just holding up the first 3 volumes here. And do you think it's important for people to start with volume 1 and then work their way through that?
I think it's best to start with volume 1 because this is it's a healing process. Yeah. And so it doesn't mean you have to do every single form in volume 1, but to work with the forms that speak to you, as being important ones for you to work with. And so, I don't know, 20 forms out of volume 1 might be, but for every individual, again, it'll be different. So I don't want to make a number. You must do 24 forms before you go on to volume 2. That doesn't make any sense. No. So anyway, but I would start with volume 1 and then move on to volume 2 and do the forms in that volume that speak to you, and then go on to volume 3 with the strengthening. Volume 4 is another way you could work with this. It can actually be done before anything else. It can be kind of a prophylactic volume, the protecting forms. In healing, you can do clearing, healing, strengthening, and then protecting. And that, it's like you're protecting the work you've done. Mm-hmm. But the protecting forms can be done before anything else. So volume 4 you could buy before anything else and work through that volume. And doesn't mean you have to do every single form either. 5, 6, and 7 are really they're very different.
You can maybe give us an indication of the difference between the later volumes and the early volumes.
Mm-hmm. So the early volumes are really telling the spiritual world, I want to be healthy. And I need your help to be healthy. And it's really helping you to form that intention and to express that intention and then to manifest that intention. You can stop there. You really could just stop with volume 4 and not go further. And those 4 volumes will help you throughout your life. I want to say this now because I didn't say this earlier. These forms are not a substitute, for medical help. They are a kind of medicine, but they are not a substitute, for going to the doctor.
I think it was in the first volume that you're saying you were very hesitant about putting in the clearing form, the cancer clearing forms, because you were worried that what might this lead to? Might you give someone a false hope, or was that your worry that
that was my concern, or that they would take this and then exclusively use these for their healing? So the early forms are for sort of manifesting this health. And it doesn't mean that you have to be perfectly healthy before you go on to work with the next forms. So the volumes 5, 6, and 7, and then 8, which will be coming out, are really a kind of path of initiation in a sense. And they're also, though, supplementary. They're not their own path. They do come out of the anthroposophical stream because that's my frame of reference. So it's not that somebody who's not an anthroposophist would not benefit from doing this path. That's not at all what that means, but they might want to familiarize themselves a little bit with the terms and to learn what the 6 basic exercises are, because it's important to work with those as a protection. The forms in volumes 5, 6, and 7 really begin, you really begin to literally transform yourself in a very conscious way. And you need the protection that the 6 basic exercises will give.
Do you describe the 6 basic exercises in one of the volumes?
I don't. I just, I do say read occult science, because those are, it's explained, an outline of occult science, which also now has a different title, but I can't think of it. And then Knowledge of Higher Worlds and Its Attainment. That is another book that those are discussed, but they're also discussed in maybe more accessible ways, really, by other people, not Steiner, but by other people who have worked with those exercises. They're very simple exercises, really, and one can simply work with the 6 basic exercises, never do form drawing, and still be doing something really good for themselves.
And the final volume that you're talking about, is that continuing those later volumes, or is that another chapter, a new kind of thing?
No, it's bringing to a close, in a sense, that next 4, the 5, 6, and 7. So it's the 4th volume in that sort of set. I was thinking of doing, 4 more volumes, but I've decided, I think, to include all this new information in another, larger book, but that's still, in the ether.
Can anyone contact you with requests for individual work or for help with a specific disease? And how do they get a hold of you, if that's possible?
Oh, so they can go on my website and they can write me an email. That anybody in the world can do that. And when I do work with individuals, I always get new forms. Sometimes, I'll get indications of, well, this person should work with, the form on page 15 from volume 2 and the form from volume 3 on page 10 or whatever. So those will be included, but I always also get new forms. So I love consultations, because new forms come and they're just, sometimes they're just specifically for that person. But often, recently I had somebody ask for a form for Parkinson's disease.
So I was thinking about asking for that, because my mother has.
Oh, okay. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So, that was for that person, but then that's for everybody else who, has that question. So I
want to thank you very much for taking part in the interview and telling us about your forms. It's been really great getting much more detail and answer to all the questions that naturally pop up. And of course, as well, you get the feeling that, you're very accessible. And so once you've bought a book, people are welcome to contact you and get more help if they need to do that. So thank you very much for attending the interview. And I wish and hope that lots more people get to see your forms in future.
Thank you. And thanks for having me here today. And it was, it was really, really fun to talk about. I love to talk about form drawing. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.